Stitch Fix.
Shopping is hard. Let's talk about it.
I don't have time to shop, so I buy all my clothes where I buy my seafood.
I just want someone to tell me what shirt goes with what pants.
I just want jeans that fit.
Stitch Fix makes shopping easy. Just show your size, style, and budget, and your stylist sends personalized looks right to your door. No subscription required, plus free shipping and returns.
Man, that was easy. I look good.
Stitch Fix, online personal styling for everyone. Take your style quiz today at stitchfix.com.
Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
It's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. I'm Jamel Zainasheff.
I'm TC.
I'm Huggy Bear, and this is Brew Strong.
Brew Strong. All right, so we have our special friend John Hughes here again. He's going to talk to us about yeast propagation, and there's a good long story on all the things John's done in the previous show, which are gold. But John, why don't you give us a less than... as much as you can fit in without, just gushing about yourself for a little while.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Used to do quality assurance at Heretic with Jamil. Did the Master Brewer Certificate program. Directed at UC Davis for a little while. And now I'm doing some writing, doing some consulting, a little teaching on the side.
Good stuff. Good stuff. In other words, he knows his stuff. And he's here to share what he knows with us. So, Jamil, you know who else knows his stuff, huh?
Blickman Engineering. They know their stuff. They're making some quality products. Smart engineers making great products that are, I think, reasonably priced for what you're getting. You get the and anything from the most basic. More basic things without a lot of bells and whistles, but really solidly built, like the Anvil line, or the Blickman line, which has got more bells and whistles and fancy stuff. And then they even have some pro size gear as well. If you're looking at starting your own brewery, well, they've got everything there for you to do so. Even fermenters that are designed to fit through a doorway. 3-barrel fermenters that'll fit through a doorway. So that's pretty cool. Again, smart guys, and really, really great of them to support the show. They pay for this show, so you don't have to. So if you get a chance, check out blickmanengineering.com. Maybe send them an email. Send a nice email, feedback at blickmanengineering.com. Tell them how you appreciate that they pay for the show.
We should send one to feedback to make sure Drew's actually checking that email. Yeah.
Right. Might ask Drew if he's actually doing that.
Hey, you mentioned that 3-barrel that fits through the doorway, and I so many things you think of, you already know, you forget to mention it. Back when I was doing some pallet batches with Huggy, he had I think it was the 1-barrel kit, nice caster set. You could roll that one around. That was much more pallet size than 3-barrel, but these days, home brewers, maybe that's 1 barrel a week. I don't know. Yeah. Burn up a storm. So I imagine that 3-barrel's got a nice set of caches on it as well. And so I don't know if Drew's watching, but hopefully some of the rest of you are watching. We're live on Facebook. The show stays up on Facebook. I'm told for 30 days. I should verify that sooner or later. And then it's removed, but it does go to the Brewing Network's YouTube channel. And of course, Justin will chop it up and put it on his website, and it'll be available where most of your podcasts are available. Although that seems to be a bit of effort as well, that Justin just knocks out the park. All right. So yeast propagation. So John, I'm assuming you've done this a couple times.
Yeah, a few times.
Tell us what we're talking about.
Yeah, so this is, if you've listened to the previous shows when we've been storing yeast on plates or slants or maybe even in the freezer, this is how we uh, build this up into a culture that's large enough to ferment a batch of beer.
All right. So I guess that's the nice clean definition of that. Very good. So why would you do this?
Well, if you have it, just colonies on a plate or something like that, it's just not nearly enough yeast to ferment a full batch of beer. And if you were to just grow up try to grow up a large culture starting from that very small amount, the chances of it getting contaminated are very high. And so you kind of want to do it stepwise in smaller, 5 to 10 fold increase in volume each time. So you got to kind of step it up, 5 or 6 steps, depending on where you're getting. Once you get up to a certain size, then you can kind of start shifting towards more of a brewing style propagation, whereas the earlier ones are going to be like making a starter, where you're going to be using, sterilized media, aerated, warm temperature. You're not trying to collect any of the, you're not going for beer here. You're just going for yeast. And then once you get on the order of magnitude of the size of a batch, maybe a quarter of the size or something like that, you can actually brew a small batch of beer and then use the yeast from that.
Very good. So, but the concept itself of propagation, as you said, you're growing it in a specific manner to grow it up keep your culture as pure as you can. You're not interested in the beer produced at each step until you get to a beer size, and then I imagine your step size probably reduces once you start making it a beer instead of just making it a growth cycle, or is it still about the
Yeah,
same?
yeah, definitely. So early on, you can step up like tenfold, right? Go from like 10 milliliters to 100 milliliters or something like that. Once you get up higher, you usually drop that down to about fourfold. So you do like a quarter of the volume. Um, and then when you step that up, it's 4 times. So
why do you do that? Why can you do 10 times early, but you only want to do 4 times later? What's the reasons for that, I guess?
the reasons are on the smaller side of things. If you do get like contamination, it's not that hard to just start over. Whereas on the larger side, you really want to give your yeast the chance of being able to kind of grow up and make that medium an uninhabitable place for other organisms.
Well, and also, if you're, when you're doing the small scale stuff in the first steps, a lot of times you're using like stir plate or something like that, and you're not looking at that beer as drinking beer, right? When you get to, the larger steps, and you'll get, 4x growth out of the yeast in a normal batch of beer. So that's about the right, about the right size. And you can then actually drink that beer instead of, trying to push growth.
Good stuff. All right. So, is this stepping up? We're typically talking about starting from plated single cell, or what are we starting with? What's
Yeah,
our parameters on
starting from
this?
a plate or even a freezer stock. So if you've got a freezer stock, you can sometimes just, pull some out of that and go directly into a small volume of liquid. More often than not, you'd actually pull out of that and streak onto a plate and just verify that you've got only a single colony type on that plate so that you're not starting with something that's contaminated. And so then you go
Interesting.
from like one colony into like a 5 or 10 milliliter culture. So really small. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you'd be doing in a glass culture tube. I mean, plastic would work too, but we're not talking flask size at this
Right.
point.
So a lot of the process you followed to get your single yeast type to verify that you were very pure on the way down, you follow a little bit of that same process as you restart to grow it back up.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I just probably dumped it in, killed it, and grown up some bacteria and made some shitty beer. All right. So you've been through the practices on how we sterilize, et cetera, as we work our way down to a single organism. What are the sterilizing techniques as you do as you're growing up from said single organism?
Yeah, the main thing here is that you just kind of want to avoid the transferring of sterile liquids as much as possible, because every time you open, a flask or a tube or whatever, that's just one more opportunity for it to get contaminated. So oftentimes what you'll see done is you'll just have the volume that you need for a particular step put into the actual tube or flask that you're going to be growing in and sterilized inside of that. And so what you can do is you can actually just have a bunch of these pre-made up, um, kept sterile as long as you keep the lid on them. And then you can just grab one of those sterile tubes, inoculate it, let it go. And then the next step up, you'd probably go into a small Erlenmeyer flask. And so that way you're not, having a big batch of, like a couple of liters of sterile wort here that you're trying to measure out into a, you know, cylinder and then pouring that into a flask or something like that. You just have it already pre-set up in that flask.
Here's your steps ready for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you sterilize those, and when we say sterilize, you say sterilize. You mean to sterilize. You don't mean sanitize. You're
Correct. Yeah.
talking
So
using heat.
we're using an autoclave. Again, the pressure canner works really well for this at home. It's a fraction of the cost of an actual autoclave, but same thing. As long as you get up to 1 bar of pressure, 15 psi, and then it's 121 degrees Celsius and like 250 degrees Fahrenheit, I think. And then you just want to make sure you hold. So when if you're sterilizing equipment, like just an empty flask or something like that, you only need to hold for 10, 15 minutes at that temperature. But if you're sterilizing larger volumes of liquid, you're going to want to increase that hold time because of the thermal mass of that liquid. So, the second you get up to 121 Celsius, the entire volume of that liquid has not necessarily reached that temperature yet. So you hold for long enough so that you can ensure that you get that liquid up to temperature, and then you hold that liquid at that temperature for, 20 minutes. Something like
I've
that.
heard of some people doing like home, like mason jars, or kind of making just like canning or jarring or something like that. Could you do something similar over there? Is that sterile? Is that a sterile enough process for that?
If you do it in the pressure canner, if you just do a normal water bath canning, that's it doesn't get up to the high enough pressure or temperature for this.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The method I use, which I'm sure Jamil told me, is you want the entire system to sit there not under pressure, boiling for 10, 15 minutes easy. So it's all at least there before you start raising the pressure, raising the temperature up. I mean, it gives you some time to stabilize before you try to bring everything up that extra, you said 250, or extra 38 degrees above boiling. Because as you said, if something might be at 250 in there, it doesn't mean everything in there is 250. It's going to take a little bit. And I don't usually do one can at a time. I do a handful. personally for work. I mean, I'm not stepped up in this propagation method we're discussing here, but when I do my sterile work, I give it, I think it's 10 minutes, or I bring it up to 15 psi for 15 minutes.
Huh. I did not tell you to do that.
Oh, I don't know where I picked that up at.
Huh. That's interesting. I mean, the way I do it, I have one of those large American canner pots, an aluminum one, and then I just put everything in there, water in the bottom, and then close it up, heat it up. You don't want to heat it too fast. I think that's kind of along the lines of what you're saying. If you really just blast it, you'll end up splashing your wort out of your containers and getting wort under the lid and all that. So you want to kind of bring it up a little slow so that it's not going underneath the lid. But once you get it up and then steam's being produced and steam's coming out your vent hole, you can then put your weight on or whatever closure you have, and then like John's saying, I use once the pressure reaches 15 psi, I know that it's 250 Fahrenheit in there, and then I start my clock and I go, I think 23 minutes, and it's absolutely sterile. I've never had a problem with any of the wort that I've canned.
Yeah, I've had some canned over a year. Never a problem. Same.
Yeah.
It's outstanding.
And there's no, if you overcook, if you go too long, you forget about it or whatever. Is there any risks, or are there any off flavors you'll get out of that if your medium is like overcooked basically, or is it just not really matter? As long as it's sugar kind of thing.
Yeah, doesn't really matter. I use like expired DME and things like that. Somebody gave me a giant brick of DME.
Nice and dinky.
So I just chisel it apart and use that. So
nice.
Yeah. So the one thing, Huggy, is you don't have it, like if you water bath can, you fill the water level above the lids. And when you pressure can, you only have a couple inches in there usually. So your can is exposed. Yeah. That's not a problem unless you boil out too much water. So if you go to bed with this boiling, you could have a problem.
Right.
With the dry pot.
Yeah, you crack some containers. I usually put, maybe a half inch, 3/4 inch of water in the bottom, which will produce a massive amount of steam. You just want everything on the outside. You want the entire environment to be steam outside the cans, and then the little airspace in the top of the jar, you want that to be steam too. And if everything's coated in steam at 15 psi, it's going to become sterile with enough time, like John was saying.
All right, let's go ahead and take our first break. When we come back, John, you can step us through timeline, planning, etc. All right, we'll be right back.
We all have that dream trip we've been wishing we could go on, but too often life, or usually price, gets in the way. That's why Priceline is here to help you turn your dream trip into reality. With up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights, you can book everything you need for your next adventure. Don't just dream about that next trip. Book it with Priceline. Download the Priceline app or visit Priceline.com and book your next trip today.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on two gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high-temperature March pump, and either a top-tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Like the Lance Armstrong of the beer world. Except for that nut thing. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back and we're talking propagating yeast with John Hughes. John, let's go ahead and separate the time.
Yeah, so the whole goal for each of these steps is to just get as much yeast growth as possible. So as long as you've got your conditions right, which I think we'll cover in a little bit later, then you generally get that maximum amount of yeast growth within about 48 hours. 24 hours is probably mostly sufficient, but best practice is you kind of let this go for about two full days before you step up into the next size. And so then when we're talking about full timeline, it depends on what your final volume is. But if you start with, let's say you start with a 10 milliliter culture, you step that up tenfold to 100 milliliters, and then you step that up tenfold to a liter. We're talking almost a week here of propagating up your yeast. So you got to plan ahead with all of this. It's not just something that you can do a couple of days before, like you did a starter from Smack Pack or something like that.
Does each step take roughly the same time, or as you grow larger and larger, it takes longer, or how does that work out?
It's about the same amount of time. The larger ones you may, I think that the only issue once you get into the larger ones is if you don't have the way to properly kind of aerate and stir, then it's going to take a little bit longer. And then it definitely, once you get into the sort of scale where you're actually just making a smaller batch of beer, that one I'd give a few more days as well. So,
especially if you want to drink the beer afterward.
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
So that's a question. I might get out of sequence and you tell us that story. With beer, as Bill's pointed out, we let all beer rest a little bit. We don't lager everything, but we let it rest when it's quote unquote finished. We know it's not really finished. And the yeast is doing some cleanup, but our goal is the beer in that case, not the yeast.
Right.
Now, in the case of where you're growing it up, does that cleanup help or hurt the yeast? If it's like you was asking earlier about sterilizing our components. If you go a little longer here and there, is your yeast starting to die off? Are you starting to have problems with what it picks up?
It's probably, if you go an extra day or two, it's probably, it's not going to die. You're going to be all right. It'll, in fact, that might be good for you if you want to try and decant off some of the spent wort from each step. Now, a lot of times, you're stepping up tenfold. The total volume of the original starter is not a significant fraction of the volume, and so you can just dump the entire thing in to the next one. Once you get into some of the smaller ones that, if you're stepping up fourfold instead of tenfold, that can definitely be a little closer to the actual volume there, and it kind of dilutes your growth medium, your wort essentially. So so you can let that go a little bit longer and kind of let the yeast settle better and then decant off so you're not adding in that additional volume. But yeah, a couple days here and there is not gonna be a problem. Just make sure that you are, maintaining a decent temperature. I wouldn't cold crash. That would slow things down for sure. You want and also if you let it sit for a couple of days, even at kind of appropriate temperature, you might still have your yeast go into a little bit of a dormant state, which would give them a little bit of a lag phase on the next step up. So, right, it's not going to hurt them. It's going to hurt you more than the yeast. It's just going to take a little longer on the next one around.
And if you don't decant and you don't give the obviously, yeah, the yeast is creating some off flavors. It's going back and cleaning them up. When you're adding that wort to the new size, it'll still go and clean up later, right? Like you're not gonna introduce off flavors because you didn't give it enough time to clean up at an earlier step, right? You can always in the future clean those up, correct?
So yeah, certainly some of them. I mean, if there's diacetyl or diacetyl precursor in there, that will certainly get cleaned up. Esters, which they are going to create, are going to be those aren't going to have a chance to be cleaned up. But I have never noticed. I think even on the fourfold kind of increase in size, I think that's enough of a dilution of them that it's kind of getting them below that threshold.
Probably also getting to enough of a volume where you can let it settle some so you can decant. So
Yeah.
it really feels like decanting smaller scale, probably not worth the effort, probably not a good idea in general, because you might be dumping good yeast. You might be pre-selecting them, very early rather than waiting to where you actually start to use the yeast to brew and then doing your selection on trying to get a less dusty yeast left behind, etc. So sounds like trying to get each step pure, clean, nothing but yeast is more effort than, and maybe not a good effort at all.
Well,
just
it's funny because I was going to mention the same thing, Travis, that you need to be careful if you're decanting that you're not selecting for the less attenuative yeast. If you decant early and there's, the less flocculent yeast left behind in the liquid, you're starting to select for things that drop out early and your attenuation won't be quite as good. If you select, the same thing can happen where you're, when a lot of people toss the yeast and then they'll collect harvest yeast off of the fermenter after everything's completely dropped out. And you start doing that a bunch of times, you get dusty yeast pretty fast. But the one thing about decanting is depends on the size of the containers you have. If you're dealing with, a liter and you want to go, larger, it might be better to dump them. And again, it's, just dependent. If you start seeing hazy yeast and stuff, you just want to be careful.
That's a good thing to keep in mind on. I mean, it's definitely a learning process for everyone who doesn't do it day in, day out as a job. That would be interesting. You take that yeast you love, and next time you brew with it, it's just not quite as dry as it used to be, and it could be because you decanted off too much of the deviations in those yeast organisms that would help you clean up. Now, you started off from a very small sample set of yeast, if not a single cell. So you've proven that as that yeast replicates, it can replicate to do every bit of anything you've heard of that type of yeast doing, including sticking around, being a little hazy, blocking out early, finishing dry, finishing sweet. So you might be able to resurrect it with future pressures. You're trying to wait longer to get your sample, or as you said, Jamil, don't dump all your yeast up front and then collect what comes back after. So you still have the ability to control it in those directions. All right, so when you grow it up in this manner, this timeline we followed, which we're a week out easy before brew day doing this, depending on how attentive you are to the process, maybe a week and a half, so if you let it go a day extra here and there.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of that, is it ready to pitch? Is it a matter of, pitch it now, or we're going to do like Jamil loves to do? I think, I know you taught me this one, wake it up again right before we pitch it.
Yeah, it should be. I guess it's ready to pitch. Especially in these larger sizes, if you are letting it settle before, so you can get rid of a lot of that volume, you are gonna run a small risk of it kind of going a little bit dormant and then having a little bit of a lag phase, which is, everyone's prepared for that lag phase. It should, in this case, take, only a few hours really before it starts getting really active. So, but yeah, it's ready to pitch. I mean, if you want to, you can preload in just a little bit of fresh wort a few hours before you pitch, and then it should be ready to go.
Yeah.
That waking them up basically is what you're talking about. So
That's that wake up yeast. We didn't talk anything about nutrients through this whole thing. Is the yeast getting? I mean, as a home brewer, I'm almost guaranteed I'm using extract. I'm not gonna mash some grains and make wort to do this process. And at a pro level, Jamil, I mean, would you buy DME, LME to make this happen, or would you like pull some runnings off a batch to use for stepping up?
Just depends, but generally DME is the way to go. But if you're brewing, especially if you're brewing something high gravity, and then you've got second runnings that are fairly substantial, you could collect those and boil them and get them to a concentration around what you're looking for. It is a bunch of extra work, and I always just go like, well, I'll just buy some DME.
Yeah.
Checking the chat. Peter must not be listening.
We've been doing it both ways. I was gonna say we've been doing it both ways. We've been sometimes we'll get like a 1-barrel pitch and prop it up to a 7-barrel batch. And so if I'm brewing back-to-back days, I'll pull a little wort off from the first brew, and then prop up the yeast in a brink and then pitch it into the second day. But sometimes my schedule doesn't, I'm only brewing one batch. So then I'll get some DME, and I've had success myself on the pro side both ways. So, sorry, you were saying, Travis, there were some questions?
No. I'm saying Peter's not online, or he'd be commenting because Jamil just described using party guile methods to propagate yeast. Which it sounds like exactly what it is. Very cool. All right, let's go ahead and take our second break, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back. You're live, I hope. We're talking Quality Labs yeast propagation with our special guest, John Hughes. Jamil, here to straighten us fools out with John dropping knowledge like I've never seen.
You hoping that our listeners are alive?
Yeah, hope so.
And not dead. Is that your hope?
Now, I like it when we have people that listen live on Facebook and give us some questions and feedback as the show goes on. Definitely, I enjoy the shows more with the live audience. And
I agree. Yeah, it's much better that way.
I get it. I listen to a lot of things that are live, but I listen to them as pre-recorded as time allows, and sometimes somebody can't get an invite out until day of because they're too busy doing other crap that's less fun than this. So there's not a whole lot of warning going on. And if you see the invites or you don't see the invites, give us feedback on that, and don't send that to Blickman. Send that to us. Let us know what we can do to make sure you're aware of when we're going to do a show. So we are doing these shows, about 2 shows back to back once a month, usually on a Wednesday, at 4:30-ish Central, 2:30-ish Pacific. All right, John, are we on to growth conditions? I mean, we just talked about how it so far it just kind of happens, but it just doesn't kind of happen. You can't just drop some stuff and walk away kind of thing. So
Yeah, for sure. Actually, really quickly, one thing I want to talk about with the timeline and culture sizes and stuff is that you can actually kind of cheat a little bit. So you see this done on the commercial side a lot if you're trying to get multiple batches of pitchable yeast off of a propagation. And so in at any level of the propagation, you can split something into two and propagate that up twice. Um, so you wouldn't have to go all the way back to a colony on a plate. Um, and so what happens is some breweries will have these you know propagation vessels, seed vessels they call them, where they've got like a smaller tank and a bigger tank, and then they'll grow the uh, grow the yeast in the smaller tank, and then pitch something like 80% of that into the bigger tank as a step up, and then they will refill the smaller tank with fresh wort and then propagate that up. And so at any point here, sometimes it's good to do it as a just as a backup, especially with the smaller steps. Just have a secondary one that
okay.
in case something goes wrong, you don't have to go all the way back. Now, once you get into the larger volumes, trying to run things in duplicate like that just as a backup can get, expensive and tedious and whatnot. But you can always take a smaller fraction of it, leave it behind, and just add more work to it and
So
propagate that up.
there's a certain section of homebrewers out there that instead of repitching, they'll always reserve some of their yeast and regrow it for their next batch. I'm not that. I'm a repitcher because I listen to Jamil, and my beers I like them. I drink them. So I like the process of going. But it's interesting you said that. And am I going to take you off track if I ask you what can go wrong?
I mean, anything can go wrong, right? The biggest thing you're worried about is contamination.
Yeah.
If you get a wild yeast in there or bacteria, you know, you are creating conditions that are ideal for the growth of microorganisms, and so they're going to grow just as well as your yeast. Um, Pescador, and so. If you get any contamination in one of these, then yeah, you're aerating it, you're keeping it at a decent temperature, then those contaminants are going to grow up. Um, if you get a small pinch of bacteria into a full batch of beer that's been pitched appropriately with yeast, chances are the yeast are going to kind of dominate and overtake that fermentation. If you get a small pinch of bacteria into a fresh batch of wort that you put in a small pinch of yeast, then they're going to grow up simultaneously. That makes sense.
I have questions on that, but that's just a sidetrack. And I also feel like we need to come back and visit that on a very soon future show, so homebrewers don't just start getting really gross. It's fine. I got enough yeast in there. I'm telling you.
Well, commercially,
Okay.
there's a lot of beers have contamination in it. They've got bacteria or wild yeast, and that's why they traditionally counted on pasteurization to counter that. Their metrics for acceptable beer is something like 10 colony forming units or less. Yeah, that's good beer. Let's go. Whereas at Heretic, as John will tell you, our target was 0. And if it had anything other than 0, we didn't send it out. So
if it had one, it was the one you put in there, damn it.
Right. That's true. That's true. We did do that too. But yeah, you know, if you're going to brew beer and, you know, put in kegs and drink it at home, there's very little to worry about, you know. If it starts tasting bad, okay, well, you know, you should have been more careful. You know, but if you're packaging beer, you really got to be tight on that unless you're going to pasteurize. So
Yeah, there's a big brewery I know that really big brewery, and they lent some yeast to a smaller brewery, and then turned out they ended up with an infection. And they said, "Oh, well, yeah, we just pasteurize everything, so we never have to worry about it, you know, once it's packaged."
Wow.
And the smaller brewery was not pasteurizing and was repitching and stuff like that. So
Probably not happy either.
one of the big guys does that.
Oh, you don't pasteurize?
Yeah. Oh, you don't pasteurize. Oh, sorry for you.
Who'd have thought?
And John, you were talking about the shaking and aerating. So what kind of the growth conditions are needed for this? And I'm looking at specifically lagers and ales. Do you want to grow at a certain temperature depending on what your yeast is?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, basically you're gonna, this is really similar. I mean, it's basically the same thing as making a yeast starter. So, you're gonna want to aerate, and so stir plates with a stir bar works really well for that. If you on the smaller side of things, when you're in like the culture tubes or in even the smaller flasks, the stir plate isn't always as effective just because everything's so small. So what people in labs use are what are called orbital shakers or shaker tables. And so it's just a flat platform that kind of moves in a circle. You can adjust the frequency, and that it's basically just like manually moving this flask in a circle and stirring it and getting it aerated. Um, if you are, if you don't have access to something like that, then just actually manually shaking it with your hands as often as you can is probably a pretty good approximation. I mean, on those smaller volumes, the oxygen is going to diffuse in from the atmosphere a lot more efficiently, even just sitting still, than in the large scale. So once you get up to larger, then a stir plate's much easier to use. Temperature wise, room temperature. I mean, people will use incubators. They keep them at like 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is what is that? 80
77 to 86. I grabbed a converter. I heard where you were going.
Get on you, TC. So yeah, so definitely a little bit warmer. That'll help them grow more quickly. If you're growing up ale yeast, you could potentially go up a little warmer than that, but I haven't seen any real benefit to that. If you are growing up lager yeast, if you go much higher than that, you're probably going to kill them. They won't be able to grow, as high as 37 degrees Celsius or 99 Fahrenheit. So
yeah, I always try to keep everything below, 90 Fahrenheit, 32 C, just because you start to slow down, especially you get into like 90, 95 Fahrenheit. They really just start to shut down a lot of times, but 90 is kind of like my peak.
So I think a lot of us as homebrewers are not really paying attention to the temperature of our starter, which we all should know that if it's in a 72-degree room, it's well above that. as the yeast is doing their things, developing heat. And we learned that that's why we need to have temperature control on our fermentation and try to understand the actual temperature of the beer, not the environment. So you're saying these numbers sound high, and then you ring. And I realize, oh, I have no idea how hot my starters get because I just keep them in a 70-degree room. And again, we know that's not the temperature of the activity that's happening in that flask. It's warmer while it's happening for sure. It's producing heat. Plus, the stir bar itself, the stir plates get a little warm themselves from the fan motor is sort of running in there for 24 hours straight. So you're just adding heat to it that we don't think about. But you guys, in the manner in which you're speaking, extremely scientific approach. You know the temperature of what you're doing, so you understand the reactions that are happening and the time it involved to go to the next step. Because like my week and a half or so is your exactly 1 week because Jamil told you when he needs that pitch. You can't lose an hour here and there, a half hour here and there, or one of Jamil's other guys has to come in later pitch instead. Yeah, that's very cool.
And for lagers, so a little cooler on the cooler side, but no worries about any of the off flavors from, fermenting too hot. I mean, kind of like on fermentation, when you ferment a lager a little too warm, you can get some off flavors. But no concern, right, with propagating the lager yeast at a warmer temp then, as long as you keep it cool enough, coolish.
And if you're decanting off the spent liquid, the spent wort, I think then it's fine. But if you're going to retain that liquid and put it in your beer, you want to be a little more careful about that because it depends on your ratios, like John was saying earlier. If it's a small enough amount, no big deal. It's like, when you are decanting it, how careful do you need to be that you're getting as much of that liquid out of there as possible? I don't think it needs to be, that exact. It can be, you can carry some of it over. Just don't carry a lot of it over. But it's also the reason I like repitched beers instead of just everything on a starter, just because of that starter wort issue.
Yeah. So, not always, but oftentimes, and I don't mean this in the wrong way by any means, but my starter smells like Miller Lite. I mean, that's a lager, a light lager, but for some reason, some of my starters kind of have that same note to them. I don't know if the DME mixed with somehow an excess of ale esters, because I'm usually growing up a 01, but I've noticed that it smells like Miller Lite. Jeez.
Well, a lot of those beers are brewed high gravity. And they're making 8-9% beers, and then they'll package them off as like a malt liquor, and then they'll also dilute it down to whatever strength for whatever beer. And so you can get some of those, higher gravity esters.
Gotcha.
In it as well.
There you go. That makes sense. All right. Is that most of the growth conditions? Anything else on growth conditions, John, that we did not cover?
I mean, the actual, we did talk about kind of flasks and tubes. I did not go into the types of kind of closures for those. So with if you're on the very small side on the cultured tubes, you'll want to make sure you have gas flow or airflow caps. So these have little
those rubber plugs out.
Right. So these have like little ridges on them that kind of keep an air gap between the lid and the tube itself. And just by moving the tube around, you get good enough airflow. Same thing with the flasks. There are like plugs. If you don't put a rubber stopper in there, that's going to be, a hermetic seal. It's going to keep the air out. But you can actually get like foam plugs that are made of some kind of like latex foam, I think. And those will fit into the mouth of the flask. You can It allows airflow, but it doesn't allow dust and things to settle.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, the easiest thing for a flask is just a piece of aluminum foil.
Yeah.
You just
That's fine.
you cut off a square and then you put it over. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the edges of the foil extend at least an inch below the mouth of the flask. You know, so you're not just having it just a little flat piece covering the top. It's wrapping around the neck of this flask.
That's so things don't fly back into your flask.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's great. It's the cheapest thing, and it allows airflow.
And then you don't have to worry about really cleaning those. Like the foam ones, if you want to reuse it, you
Yeah.
have to, sterilize those each time.
Yeah.
And I'm always assuming that, just regular old aluminum foil that you buy in the grocery store, that is probably sanitary, because, or at least sanitary, if not sterile, because of the way it's made.
Heat.
Yeah, I mean, it's extruded through rollers.
Yeah,
double sheet. That's why one side's shiny and one side's dull, the way it's made. And then you got to figure, I guess it's possible while they're rolling it up, there could be some contamination there, but I've never had a problem using aluminum foil. They do have aluminum foil little dispensers that you can get, from lab supply companies.
I bet that costs a little bit extra, right? It's a little more expensive than Reynolds or Costco.
Right.
Yeah.
I suppose you could wave it around in some flame or something, or sanitize it with some sanitizer if you wanted.
Yeah,
I was squirt with the star sand.
Yeah, I do that. Now, we're talking specifically about growing it up, so it's not the same process as making a starter. When I make a starter, I always put the foil on while it's still steaming, but I also already hit it with a sanitizer. We don't have that same luxury when we're dealing with these very small volumes that are already pre-set up. So I don't get that little bit of heat. That's not sterilizing, but just helping with the sanitization of the system.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, with this, number one is if you just were to pull a piece off and put it on this flask, assuming it's dry, yeah, you're probably not going to get anything dropping off of that. If you put something that's wet on there, then you could get some drips that might carry something down. But really, you put the foil on this, when you are sterilizing it. So you put the volume of wort that you wanted in there, you wrap the foil over it, and you just put that whole thing in the autoclave pressure canner. And then when it's done, the foil will keep it sterile because it's not letting any dust or anything in. And then you can just sort of hold on to that for a while, and it should be sterile.
I feel like that's a little trickier for the home brewer with the home canning system because test tube is set a small device in our pressure canner with that foil on top. The boiling water is you probably lose foil. The whole thing will be sterile, but then you open it up to atmosphere.
You won't. You just get a test tube rack, put your tubes in there.
Put that in there.
They're standing up. Yeah, the test tube rack.
I was thinking we need the Anvil or the Blickman sanitizing rack to drop down into our pressure canner.
And then you can put foil over all of them. And, when the process is done and I wait the 23 minutes at 15 PSI, I just let it cool down. I just turn off the burner and then I just let it cool down. And I don't care if it takes, sometimes I leave it overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
PSA, don't take the weight off.
Right. Don't
wait until the pressure switch drops.
Don't bleed it off when there's pressure, because what that causes is everything to boil violently in your containers, and that could push the foil off if you're using foil or whatever.
It'll probably hurt you too. You're right there next to it when you pull that weight off.
You could burn yourself. I just wait until it's completely zero and I can touch the thing, and then there's no worries in that.
Mine has a little lock that pops up once there's pressure and it won't drop down because there's no pressure. I walk away till it drops. Yeah, that's when I'm going to open it. Not until the lock is dropped out. Yep. All right, let's go ahead and take another break, and we'll have some more thoughts. This is a. I feel like we have 1.5 shows, but we might get it in one show here. You're gonna let me know, John, Jamil. Buddy. All right, we'll be right back.
Eczema is unpredictable, but you can flare less with Ebglyss, a once-monthly treatment for moderate to severe eczema. After an initial 4-month or longer dosing phase, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin at 16 weeks. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
TaxAct is here anytime you want to easily file your taxes. TaxAct is here for the early birds who like to knock them out as soon as the season opens, and for the procrastinators who like to wait until the very last minute. TaxAct is also here for the middlers who file right in the middle of tax season. No one ever talks about the middlers, but TaxAct sees you, and TaxAct respects you. TaxAct, let's get them over with.
Your planet is now marked for death.
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four: First Steps is now streaming on Disney+.
We will protect you.
As a family.
Light them up, Johnny!
Marvel's first family is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
That is fantastic.
And critics say it's one of the best superhero movies of all time.
Oh!
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four: First Steps, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
What time is it, Ben? It's clobber time!
Brew right. Brew smart. Brew strong.
This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back talking yeast propagation. Last 2 shows were plating yeast, so we brought yeast down to the most basic single cell organism, and we're growing it back up. You should have caught on to that by now, unless you tuned in late live. All right, so checking for contamination. Are you testing this every step of the way? What are we doing here?
If you're doing this commercially, yes. You're going to, at every step here, you're pulling a little bit off, and it doesn't take much. So it's not like you're depleting the volume or anything, but you're pulling a little off and putting this onto plates to make sure you are, you only have your yeast in there. I guess best practice would be to just check as often as you are able, right? So if it doesn't mean as a homebrewer you have to do that every single step, but maybe on the very last one, or maybe just before you pitch this into a batch, you might want to spread some of this onto plates and see if you've got anything besides your yeast in there.
If we followed your process and we've learned how to plate yeast out and we know what we're doing on that aspect, as a minimum, before you throw in your beer, plate it. Now, if you made it that far and it's fine, congratulations. If you didn't make it that far and it's fine, well, you're going to wish you had plated it at each step to figure out which step went south.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah. So
I think in a lot of cases, like I said, if you're brewing for home and to just enjoy at home and it's going into kegs, it's like, it's
be fine.
There's not that much danger. If it tastes good, it tastes good. That's you don't have to know for sure, but yeah, I'm kind of with John. Maybe your last step, you want to play it a little bit out and just see. And if you played it out and what you get is the colonies that you're expecting, well, there you go. Now you got some colonies of your yeast that you can save and start it up again the next time you want.
Very cool. Very cool.
One question I had, does this apply to bacteria as well? Is this the same method? Like, say you had a favorite bacteria you wanted to grow up and use in a beer. Would you do the same process for propagating bacteria, or is bacteria and yeast different in that aspect?
Mostly the same process. The one area where you would get differences is if you were growing up some anaerobic bacteria. So there's some bacteria out there that are obligate anaerobes is the term, where they don't do well with oxygen, and that's actually true for a lot of the lactic acid bacteria. So in that case, it would be all the same except you wouldn't aerate, and you would want to have some kind of closure mechanism on your vessels so that you wouldn't let a lot of oxygen in. And in that case, that you don't need a flask because it's you don't need that sort of geometry for the stirring. In this case, you could use like a mason jar or something, and then have that lid to kind of seal on there. So
nice.
Yeah, so when you were back talking about the aeration and so forth, it reminded me of when Jamil was talking about, I don't remember if it was Aussies or Kiwis that were going around with their starters and like their 1 liter jug, shaking it all the time. Might not have been Jamil. Pretty sure it was.
I mean, you can do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a stir plate. Just
right.
Like John was saying earlier, if you just shake that thing every time you walk past it, pick it up, give it a shake, it'll help. When I did the data for the pitching rate calculator, I compared shaken versus stirred, and non-stirred as well, non-shaken. So
yeah, those are also options if somebody can manage to run that application, which I can run it because I use it every time I brew.
Not as good as stirred, but it certainly worked.
I'm just picturing something that looks like a shake weight, but shakes yeast instead,
There you go.
All right, very good. So are we just growing this? We discussed it, right? Jamil, you use DME, you might have used second runnings. Is there anything I meant to ask you? Did I ask? Are we using any kind of nutrient at any stage as we grow this up?
I've never seen the need for it. That's always the nice thing about brewing is that wort has pretty much all the nutrients that we really need. The main one that brewers want to add is going to be zinc, and that's for fermentation. You're not really worried too much about the alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme in a propagation here. So you're not going to need to supplement your propagation with zinc at all.
Okay.
If you're really cheaping out and you're using, just like sugar or something like that, you'd probably want us to go add some additional nitrogen or nutrient to that.
So that's a very interesting point. It never once struck my mind if you might try to grow this up on sugar, and half of that is there's distinct differences between maltose and sucrose, or dextrose, etc. And Jamil's always told us the yeast gets used to the easy sugar, which maltose is not the easy sugar. Would you try to use something like dextrose to build up a yeast?
And generally, no, I wouldn't. Again, yeah, you want to use something as close to what you're going to be fermenting in. You don't want to run any risk of any kind of genetic drift on those maltose degrading or transporting genes. So I probably shouldn't have even added that in about the sugar.
People ask all the time about, if they can grow yeast on this or that, or all sorts of different things. People are like, yeah, I got a ton of honey. And it's like, really?
Grow it up for some meat.
Yeah, that's pretty expensive stuff to use for growing yeast. So
I'm glad you bring it up because then we got to discuss it.
I would say going back to the contamination when you're checking for that, how do you, what's a good way to go about doing the sample collection for that in a clean manner?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say probably the easiest way to avoid introducing anything is, so oftentimes when you're stepping up this, right, you're going to pour from one flask or tube into the next size up. And so you'd want to do that, have that aseptic environment that we talked about a couple of months ago, I think it was. But you can leave a little tiny bit behind in the previous vessel. And so that way you can sample out of that. You could even just pour a couple of drops of that onto a plate and let that grow up. And that way you're not concerned about really introducing anything into your next step of the propagation. If you have a full lab setup, a sterile glass pipette or plastic pipette, generally that's okay. If you just sort of, remove the little bit, put that down in and draw up a milliliter or something like that. So yeah, pretty simple to collect some of this. You don't need a whole lot. Usually when you're plating, really you're just like a drop and then you're going to streak that out. So.
Nice. Yeah, I like the idea of just sampling it from your last container that you're stepping up from. That's smart. That way you do it and inadvertently infect something or get something in there. You're not infecting that whole thing downstream.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that's a technique that doesn't jump into my mind typically, but I like that you brought it up a couple times now. Reserve some, sample that rather than dip whatever you have that's supposed to be sterile, maybe not be, into your whole big could be contaminated. So that's a very good concept, very good tip. All right, so I feel like this has been a very explanatory show. You've really stepped us through this, John. I mean, short of having a PowerPoint or a whiteboard. I'm not sure what else how much you could have conveyed, because you did. Any other tips? Anything else that you think we might not have discussed on getting us to where we're at, building it up? You really broken it down well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say just have at it. Just try things out. If you get contamination, don't sweat it, right? Don't use it, but don't beat yourself up about it. That's like 101 microbiology, is that you're gonna contaminate things. And so don't get all hard on yourself about this. Just keep trying and try to figure out where you went wrong and make some changes.
I'm with John. Don't get hard on. Don't on yourself. And just give it a try. It can be, believe it or not, one of the funner parts of brewing. To work with the yeast and to really. Instead of just buying a pitch or a pack of dry yeast, get to learn the yeast more, because they're such a critical part of fermentation, and not just in beer but in other things. So the more you learn about it and the more you learn how to handle yeast properly, the better off you'll be on all these other things. Then you can start, collecting wild yeasts and doing all sorts of strange stuff if you want.
Very good. All right. So I don't have a list of our future Quality Lab shows. I wish we did. And I think we're going to be a solid 4 weeks at least, if not 5 weeks before the next one. We're going to run into Thanksgiving a little bit because anyone who's watching live can see the moving boxes behind me. I'll be in a different house next time I do a show, I think, whether it's temporary or my next home. So I'm really glad we got a show in today. Last week I didn't realize it was not going to be a good idea because of GABF, which I think we forgot to mention. Huggy's got something to announce about GABF.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I went out for judging and then got to take home a medal.
All right.
So,
hey, congrats.
Congrats. What did you win?
Thank you. For Bach, traditional Bach.
Nice.
Got a bronze. So
Nice.
pretty happy about that.
Well done.
Yeah. I meant to mention it earlier, Huggy, sorry. I think that's outstanding. All right, so don't forget to visit our sponsors, Blickman Engineering, and all the commercials that have been inserted in between by Justin, not necessarily the ones that have been inserted by Yahoo, YouTube. Don't worry about those so much. But yeah, Blickman, they're our people. They're your people. Try out their stuff. We're going to do, I don't know, we're going to do as many of these as John can stand us for, because I think the information we get on these shows is outstanding. And if you're live, we're going to have our From the Mail sack coming up. We're going to reach into that sack and see what we find. Jostle it around a little bit, caress maybe. Anyway.
Something good.
Thanks for tuning in.
You're so immature.
I learned from the best. Brew Strong, everybody.
Brew Strong.
Brew Strong.
Brew Strong.